Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a lesson on security threats. Now, I've mentioned that there's a number of different areas of security when it comes to computer networking, and this is a pretty important one. This has to do with knowing what the threats are to your environment, because quite frankly, if you don't know what the threats are, well, then you don't really know how to protect against them. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first type of security threat that I want to talk to you about is ones that have to do with wireless networks. Okay, so when dealing with your wireless networks, which are, pretty much commonplace in today's day and age, wireless has gotten to be so good that every network has some component of wireless, it seems like. So what are some of the threats that we have to deal with when it comes to wireless networks? Well, the first one I'll mention is something called war driving and war chalking. Now, these are both kind of one and the same. The idea behind war driving is it's a way of driving down the road. Okay, picture you're just driving down the road looking for wireless networks. And along with that, once you find them, you're then going to hack into them. Yeah, that's war driving. Now, what is war chalking? It's really nothing more than the idea of actually marking those locations. I mean, if you picture that you're driving down the street and every time you come across an SSID, right? You could be doing something as simple as just keep searching for wireless networks. Go down the street. Oh, here's one. Literally take out a piece of chalk and mark the street or mark the sidewalk or mark the building. So as to tell everybody, hey, there's a wireless network here. So you may mark it so that other people can know about it. Now, this happens very often in individual local communities where people will go around looking for open wireless networks so that people can just realize, oh, look, here's a network. I can get internet from here. It allows people to go through and just get free internet. The other aspect of it is where sometimes you might go through and just look for wireless networks of any kind, whether they are open or whether they are secured. And you'll go through and then you will mark where all those wireless networks are so that either you can come back later or maybe somebody else who's coming along after you can know that there's a wireless network that needs to be broken into. Okay, so that's war driving and war chalking. Now, I mentioned about breaking into some of these wireless networks. Well, that's where WEP or WEP and WPA cracking come into play. And really, I will tell you that the idea behind WEP and WPA cracking is just what it sounds like. It's the idea of cracking the encryption codes that are securing the wireless networks. The one thing that I will tell you is that cracking a WEP network is exponentially easier than cracking a WPA network. Okay, and we talked about wireless security in another lesson where we talked about WEP and WPA, and then of course WPA too. But with both WEP and WPA, there are methods, whether it be some form of a just password guessing or some form of brute force attack or dictionary attack or all sorts of different attacks that you go through and figure out what the encryption codes are. And then you're in the network. And some of the other issues that we have when it comes to wireless security threats is the problem of something called rogue access points. And this is not always something that is done with the purpose of it being an attack. In some cases, an access point can be placed on your network. And again, what is it? I mean, I guess I should define it here first. It's these access points being placed on the network without the administrator's knowledge. So you don't know about it, but there's another access point on your network. This could be something as simple as a user on your network. They didn't realize the harm that they're causing. They're just trying to make life convenient for themselves, right? Maybe you have a user who is somewhat knowledgeable about how networks work, and they go ahead and just plug in an access point to give themselves some wireless capabilities in their office area. Well, the problem is that when you don't know about those access points, well, somebody else might be attacking your network through it, meaning they're not set up to be secure the way you would set up all of your access points. Now, speaking of rogue access points, that leads us to another threat that we have here. It's something called Evil Twin. And it's the idea of having, now I have it listed here as a homemade wireless access point. It doesn't have to be truly homemade, like you literally took a bunch of circuitry at home and you built this access point. It's an access point that's been modified, and that's what I mean by homemade, where it is camouflaged as a legitimate hotspot within your network, so that when other users see it, they'll think, yeah, that's where I'm supposed to connect. Okay, so it's made to look like it's a legitimate access point to get onto your network. And the idea is that the end user will connect to it, and then the attacker can gather information about your network and about that user's computer. And, it can be something that we'll talk about elsewhere, but as far as maybe a little bit of phishing or almost a form of social engineering, to where because the user thinks they're connected to the correct corporate network, they're going to divulge information. They might be prompted for a username and password, and they'll give it. Okay, so that's what the evil twin is when you have essentially a rogue access point that has been explicitly set up for the purposes of making users believe that they are connecting to the correct network and give information. So that's just some of the things you need to keep in mind if you're going to be working with wireless networks. Now let's talk about some specific types of attacks that take place when it comes to your network. And the first and one of the most common things out there, everyone's heard of this, is something called a virus. What is a virus, right? We hear that term all the time, but what is it? It is software which is designed to perform harm to a system which is loaded without the user's permission. Okay, that's the general definition of a virus. Now, some viruses are more harmful than others. Some just become a nuisance and get in the way. Others will delete information. Others will take information and transfer it elsewhere so that it can be stolen. There's all sorts of different reasons that viruses are out there. Now, there's a couple other terms I want to go over with you here that are considered by many people to be a form of a virus, but they really are a separate type of attack of their own. The first one is a worm. And again, this is a form of a virus, but here's the difference. It's a self-propagating virus. It is the type of virus which does not necessarily require some action on the part of the user in order to get into the system. It is able to, well, I guess pun intended here, right, because it's the name of what it's called, but it worms its way through your network from system to system. Another type of virus is something called a Trojan horse. Now, if you're familiar with what a Trojan horse is, if you go back to the ancient days, then you already understand what a Trojan horse is in computing terms and in virus terms. The idea is that this is a virus which will disguise itself as something else, and more specifically, something as harmless. And not only will it be something harmless, but it'll disguise itself as something enticing. Okay, so it'll look like something friendly and fun. And the user will say, yeah, I want that. And so they'll install it, and they'll launch it, and boom, there you go. Now you have a virus. These days, I find that the Trojan horses tend to be the most common form of virus out there, because there's so many virus protection programs out there, ones that can look for virus-type activity, that very often the way they get in is, well, they need to disguise themselves in a way that not only does the virus protection software not catch it, but the user says, yeah, come on in. Or the user might tell the virus protection software, yeah, ignore this thing. I told it to come on in. It's safe. Don't worry about it. So you see a lot of those out there. Now, another type of attack is something called a denial of service, or a DOS attack. And this is not an attack that is designed to steal or destroy information. This is a type of attack that is put in place to shut down a system or prevent a system from performing its regular duties. And the idea is you overwhelm a system. You hit it with so much information that it's overwhelmed, and then it is incapable of doing what it's supposed to do. And these denial of service attacks have advanced into something called distributed denial of service. And this is the idea where now you have this denial of service attack that's coming from a multitude of compromised systems, right? So you have all these different systems that you've gotten a hold of, right? You've already gotten in, the attacker's gotten in, got a hold of all these systems, and all these systems together are going to pound this one system. So that's why we say it's distributed. It's not just one system pounding a system until it can't do its service anymore. Now you have a bunch of systems. And this is a very common form of attack because there's a lot of people out there who don't realize that they need to have their systems secure. Right? The internet, everyone's out there. And a very large percentage of people are just out there unprotected. So your attackers grab hold of their systems and use their systems to just pound the heck out of your system to where it can't perform its function. Now let me give you an example here. Let's say you have a web server, right? You have a web server, you have a website, and it's a very successful website. And you have a competitor who's upset about that. So they say, I know what I can do. I'm going to take down the competition. I don't need to steal anything from them. I just need their website to not be available. So let's just pound that web server with needless information and duties so that it is incapable of actually being a web server anymore because it's so busy doing so many other things. And if you're an e-commerce company where your web server is everything, well, then guess what? You're out of business during this denial of service attack. All right, so that's what those are. And there's a type of denial of service attack called SMERF, which is where this is real interesting. If you think of everything that I've taught you in this course, so we talk about ping in another lesson. Imagine where a ping request is sent to a broadcast address, which means you're pinging everybody on a network, and you spoof who the originator of that request is. Because if you think about what ping is, I send out a request that says, hey, can you hear this? And then if you do, you're supposed to respond back to me and say, why, yes, I do. So now imagine that I sent that ping out to everybody. So everybody on a network's hearing, hey, can you hear this? And every single one of those computers are going to respond back to the source and say, yes, I do, 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 right? Coming in from everywhere. But you spoofed the source, so it's not your machine that those responses come back to. It's that other machine that you pretended to be is suddenly inundated with all these ping responses to where it can't do anything else. Another type of attack is something, and I mentioned this in other lessons, I bring this up a lot when it comes to security, is something called social engineering. And then sometimes we'll refer to a certain form of social engineering as phishing with a PH, not with an F. And this is where somebody pretends to be somebody or something that they are not in order to gain your trust so that you'll share secret information. It's very common. I mean, this is one of the most common forms of attacks out there. I've done it just, I was dissatisfied with the service I was getting from a certain company, and I wanted to be able to file a complaint, but this is one of those companies that's set up that you can only talk to the end customer service people who can't do anything for you, and you don't feel confident, or at least in this case, the one example I can think of, I didn't feel confident that my complaint was ever going to be heard by somebody that mattered. So I looked up the company's, information and found a main phone number for them, like at their local corporate offices, called and got an operator and pretended to be somebody else, right? I didn't call and say, I'm angry and I want to talk to the vice president of marketing, or something like that. I didn't do that because they're going to go, oh, you're angry? I'll connect you to customer service. I went ahead and pretended that I was somebody else. I don't remember my exact tact that I used, but it was something along the lines of saying that I was trying to get a hold of the vice president of marketing. We had talked yesterday, or I think I might have even said we were just talking and we got disconnected. So she went ahead and connected me. Now I didn't get through, but I got a voicemail that said, hi, you've reached, and I won't give you any names, but we'll say, blah, 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 vice president of marketing. I'm not available right now. Great. Now I'm able to call back at a later time, and I get that operator, and I say, yeah, hey, this is, and I just make up some phony name or whatever and say, I'm looking for, and I give the exact name of the person. Now the receptionist is like, oh, okay, well, they know the name of this person. They must belong here, so let me patch them through. And I even said, I keep getting their voicemail. Do you know if they're in today? And then I got the person's schedule and found out when I could get a hold of them. This is a huge, huge problem because users are very vulnerable to this. They'll believe anything. They want to believe people. They want to believe people are honest and of high integrity. And they want to take care of people. So when they have someone come in and talk about, pretending they're something they're not, they believe it. So be careful about social engineering. Man in the middle is just what it sounds like. It's the idea behind somebody actually gets into the network and somehow interferes in the communication between two parties. And when I say interfere, I really should say intercept. I mean, that's what I have here. But the idea is they interfere by intercepting that transmission. And they can either just eavesdrop on the conversation, right? So they intercept it and then pass it along. Or they interfere, as I mentioned in the first place, where they change what's being said so as to control the conversation and maybe get even more information by doing so. Buffer overflow is another type of attack where basically an application typically has a certain amount of buffer. It's a certain amount of memory, a certain amount of information it can hold while processing the different information that it's getting. And one way of attacking an application that's designed to have certain protection mechanisms is by sending so much information to that application that its buffer overflows. And when the buffer overflows, sometimes that application will now give you capabilities that you otherwise wouldn't have had because there were protection mechanisms in. But the protection mechanism won't function because the buffer has been overflowed and it's struggling to catch up with all the other information before it stops you from what you're doing. We have something called packet sniffing, which again is kind of just what it sounds like. It's the idea of sniffing around on a network for watching and capturing all the different packets that are traveling around on the network and seeing what might be useful either for a more detailed attack or maybe just get information straight through the packet sniffing. If you think that someone would have the ability to sniff packets on your network, well, then you might want to talk about some form of encryption to prevent information from being out there in plain text. We have an attack called FTP bounce, which is an exploit of the FTP protocol, where an attacker is able to use the port command to request access to ports indirectly through the use of a victim machine as a middleman for the request. Okay, so it's the idea of being able to, it's almost like a form of a port scan, where you can find out what ports are available. All right, so now that we've talked about some of the different types of attacks that can happen, there's something really important that you need to pay attention to. And that is, who are your attackers? Who do you think they are? Is it your employees? Maybe ex-employees? Competition? Just jerks who want to cause harm? I don't know. You know who your attackers are? Everyone! And you really need to keep that in mind. Everyone is a potential attacker. So what can we do to protect our network? I mean, if we have all these different types of attacks and we have everyone as a potential attacker, well, what can we do? Well, I will start off by just flat out telling you nothing's perfect. Okay, there is no such thing as an absolute 100% foolproof, security issue-free network. All we can do is take certain steps to help mitigate the problem. Step number one is you can implement strong policies and procedures. Okay, so you put security policies in place that say your users can only do certain things, and maybe at certain times, maybe on certain computers. Okay, and those are some of the policy side of it. And then you have your procedures, which has a lot to do with maybe not so much the actual preventative procedures, but sometimes the responding procedures. Not just responding to an attack, but also responding to somebody who is abusing the policies. And I don't think I can emphasize enough how important that step is. Taking the time to put in policies and procedures that are very well thought out and are realistic and this is a very important and, are consistently enforced. Okay, that's a real big part of maintaining a good secure network. But what else can we do? Well, you can conduct well thought out and continuous user training. And you'll notice I said well thought out user training. I will tell you, as a trainer and as somebody who has worked for companies where I've had to go in and tell users this is what you can do and this is what you can't do, and it's because of all these security reasons, and you get everyone in the room who's like, why am I here? What's the point? That's because it wasn't well thought out training. You didn't really talk about things that affect the users specifically or talk to them about things that they might actually do. and so they just turn you out. So you really want to put together some good, thought-out training, and it should be ongoing because security is always a moving target. Now, another thing you can do from a more specific technological perspective is making sure that all of your systems are kept up to date with all of the various security patches that the different vendors are going to put out there. I mean, that's why they're there. They put them out there because they've realized that there's a hole that the attackers can get through, so they patch it up. Well, if you ignore those patches, well, guess what? The attackers aren't going to ignore it. They're just going to come on through. And one other tip that I have for you, and this is another one, it's, a lot of people will roll their eyes and be like, whatever, there's a million of them and this and that. I strongly recommend that you subscribe to the various security bulletins, especially ones that are specific to the vendors whose, I would say, both operating system, application, and hardware that you're using. Okay, I mean, there might be a lot of other random security bulletins out there that people put out saying, oh, I just kind of keep an eye on security as a whole. Yeah, it's not that I'm telling you not to subscribe to those, but specifically I'm saying you should subscribe to the vendor ones. And here's the reason why. Because the attackers are. I mean, Microsoft, for instance, they'll put out a security bulletin that says, we've just noticed this big gaping hole in our operating system. And the attackers out there are sitting there, they're reading this going, wow, thank you for telling me. And then they know that a certain percentage of people are not going to see that bulletin, or at least not until after they've developed some form of attack based upon that vulnerability. So these are just a few of the steps of, talking about what you can do to help mitigate against some of these security threats. So now when it comes to securing your devices, okay, this is something that I think is really important to keep in mind. When you talk about the different threats on your network, you need to keep your devices secure. Now, your devices need to be secured from local access and remote access. And here's the deal. Local access is secured by using physical security, and remote access is secured by using secure connectivity protocols. So let's talk about each of these two things. First, local security. This is one of the most overlooked areas of security, restricting physical access to your important network devices. I cannot emphasize this enough. People just don't pay attention to the fact that there might be a router that's in an insecure physical location where people can get to it. Or even servers that are in a room that is not secured. I went to a company once on a consulting gig, and this was a small company. They just had one server. And when I went in there and I walked in the door and I'm looking around, I'm by the reception area and there's no one there. And I'm kind of like, hello, is anyone here? And I started actually walking into the company before I finally came across somebody. And they're like, yes, can I help you? And I said, well, I'm here, to do the consulting work on your server. Oh, great. Well, let me show you where the server is located. And I come to find that the server was located on the floor under the receptionist's desk. How about that? I was standing in that reception area for like 5-10 minutes with nobody acknowledging me. Nobody sitting there. And this server just sitting there. I could have grabbed it and just ran with it. Or maybe I would have had enough time to sit down and start attacking the network if I knew no one was going to come look in that room for quite a while. Now, you can remedy this situation very easily by locking devices in a secure room. And if you have a situation where the device cannot be actually physically locked down, well, then maybe you use things like surveillance equipment. Surveillance equipment only goes so far because, great, we had somebody steal a server or a device or they hacked in, but, and now I know about it, right? Because we had video surveillance and we found out after the fact, oh, look, there they are. Sure enough, we've been attacked. There was the person. But it certainly can be used as evidence, if you can get a good look at their face or something like that. But the other thing that surveillance equipment can do is sometimes just the presence of a camera is enough to make people go, ooh, yeah, I'm going to go somewhere else. Now, when it comes to remote access security, you need to make sure that you're using secure protocols. And I have some examples here for you. And I'll emphasize this is just some examples. There are many other communication protocols. But if you're going to use FTP, it's a good idea to use SFTP. the Secure File Transfer Protocol. What is this used for? Uploading and downloading files. If you're using HTTP for like your connectivity to your web content, use HTTPS with SSL. Telnet and RSH, or remote shell. The secure version to do this remote command line management would be SSH, secure shell. RCP is the remote copy protocol. You can secure that with the secure copy protocol. Never guess what that's for. It's for copying files. And then we have SNMP, the Simple Network Management Protocol. The unsecure version is versions 1 and 2. And the secure version is version 3. And SNMP is used for network monitoring. Now, I will tell you there is essentially nothing in this chart that you shouldn't already know if you've been watching the rest of this course, because I've gone through all these protocols in some other capacity. But I just kind of wanted to bring it together and remind you that you may want to use secure communication to help avoid certain security threats. And so that does bring us to the end of this lesson. And remember, unless you understand what the threats are to your network, you're never going to be able to protect against them. So make sure you keep up to date on all the latest and greatest attacks and vulnerabilities that are out there so that you can keep your network secure. Well, that's pretty much it. So I'll see you in the next lesson.